The sky was heavy with clouds, a pale gray blanket that seemed to press down on the city. A steady drizzle misted the streets, turning sidewalks slick and making the air smell faintly of wet asphalt and exhaust. Emily tugged her worn coat tighter around herself as she hurried down the narrow street, her breath fogging in the chill. Her worn flats slapped against the pavement, the soles almost paper-thin from years of wear. She had already skipped breakfast, knowing there wasn't enough milk left for both her and Jake, and the hollow ache in her stomach mixed with the anxious knot that had been sitting there for weeks. The luxury hotel's towering glass facade appeared in the distance, its gleaming entrance looking so out of place in the drab, rain-soaked morning. Emily always felt small when she approached it, not just physically, but in every way. Guests walked in wearing designer coats and polished shoes, stepping out of black sedans, while she slipped in quietly through the staff entrance, careful not to draw attention. She'd been late twice in the last month because Jake's fever had spiked at the worst times, and her supervisor had made it clear there would be no more warnings. Today had to be perfect. She had promised herself she would smile, be fast, and make no mistakes. No matter how tired she felt, she would keep her head down and do her work. The lobby was already buzzing when she arrived. The air smelled faintly of lilies from the fresh floral arrangements, and the marble floors gleamed like still water. Music played softly from hidden speakers, the kind of calming background notes meant to make wealth feel even more comfortable. Emily clocked in and quickly adjusted her crisp white shirt and black skirt before grabbing the tray she'd been assigned. It was set with 6 tall flutes of champagne, pale gold and bubbling under the crystal light. The event upstairs was for one of the wealthiest families in the city, a birthday celebration for a little girl she'd overheard. It was strange to her, the idea of renting a ballroom and filling it with roses, silver balloons, and chandeliers just for a child's party. She thought of Jake and how excited he had been last month when she'd brought home a small chocolate cupcake with a single candle for his birthday. He had smiled like it was the greatest gift in the world. Her heels clicked softly as she made her way toward the grand staircase, the tray balanced carefully in her hands. She kept her eyes forward, her shoulders squared, reminding herself that her job depended on every small motion. She'd passed waiters carrying platters of hors d'oeuvres, florists making last-minute adjustments, and a man in an expensive suit speaking into a sleek phone. It was just another workday, until she heard it. The sound sliced through the hum of voices and clinking glasses, a sharp, panicked scream, high and thin like glass breaking. Emily froze, her eyes snapping toward the source. At the far end of the balcony, a little girl was clinging to the wrought iron railing, her small shoes slipping against the polished floor. She was leaning too far over, her face pale with terror, and her fingers looked as if they could lose their grip at any second. Guests were still talking, oblivious, their laughter floating in the air, but Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. For a fraction of a second, she didn't move. The tray wobbled in her hands. And then something inside her snapped into place, an instinct, sharp and undeniable. The champagne flutes tilted, liquid sloshing over the rims, before the tray dropped from her grasp. Glass shattered across the marble with a deafening crash, but Emily didn't even look down. She was already running toward the girl. Emily's feet barely touched the ground as she closed the distance to the balcony. The sharp scent of spilled champagne mixed with the faint perfume from the party, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heartbeat. The little girl's white dress fluttered dangerously in the draft from the open doors. Her small fingers clung desperately to the railing, knuckles pale, her dark hair whipping across her tear-streaked face. She was leaning far too far forward, her torso over the edge, her feet half sliding on the slick marble. "Hold on." Emily's voice rang out, louder than she expected. A few heads turned in confusion, but most of the guests hadn't yet grasped the danger. Their laughter faltered only slightly as she darted past them, weaving between clusters of people and half-toppled chairs. A waiter carrying a tray of dessert stumbled back to avoid colliding with her, his eyes wide. She didn't slow down. The only thing in her vision was the girl and the yawning drop beyond the balcony rail. Emily's shoes skidded slightly on the polished floor, and she caught herself on the edge of a table before lunging forward. The child's fingers were slipping, tiny nails scratching uselessly against the ironwork. In a split second, Emily was there. She dropped to her knees, one hand gripping the cool iron bar for balance while the other reached out. "I've got you," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline racing through her veins. The girl's eyes locked onto hers, wide, wet, and terrified, and for a moment Emily saw Jake's face instead, his own frightened gaze on nights when he woke from nightmares. The little fingers gave way. Emily lunged forward, wrapping her arms around the child's small waist and pulling with all her strength. The girl let out a sob, burying her face against Emily's shoulder as she clung to her rescuer. Emily held her tightly, feeling the rapid, panicked heartbeat against her own chest. Now the room had gone almost silent, a ripple of shock spreading through the guests as they processed what had happened. The music had stopped. Somewhere in the distance, a man shouted a name, probably the girl's father, but Emily barely heard him. She was too focused on steadying the trembling child in her arms, whispering quietly, "You're safe now. It's okay." Then, the sharp, clipped sound of high heels on marble broke through the moment. Emily looked up to see her manager striding toward her. His expression was not one of relief or gratitude. His narrow face was tight with anger, his gaze flicking from the sobbing child to the shattered glass glittering on the floor nearby. "What in the world do you think you're doing?" His voice was low but seething, meant to be heard only by her, though the tension in it carried across the room. "You've made a spectacle of yourself, disrupted the event, and destroyed expensive property." Emily's mouth fell open in disbelief. She was about to fall. "You're done here," he cut her off coldly. "Clear out your things. You can collect your final paycheck next week." The words hit harder than she expected, even in the middle of her racing thoughts. She wanted to argue, to point out that the champagne could be replaced and the glass swept away, but a child's life couldn't be undone. But the man had already turned, signaling to another staff member to take over. The little girl still clung to Emily's neck, reluctant to let go, but eventually one of the guests, an older woman in a shimmering dress, gently coaxed her away. Emily stood, numb, watching as the girl was carried off toward the far side of the room. The sound of hushed whispers followed her like a shadow as she walked toward the service exit, her hands still trembling from the rescue and her ears ringing with the words, "You're done here." That night, the apartment felt colder than usual. The rain hadn't stopped all day, and now it drummed against the thin windows with a steady, unrelenting rhythm. Emily sat at the kitchen table, her shoulders hunched, staring at the small pile of bills spread out in front of her. The yellow envelopes for overdue notices seemed to glare at her, the red print shouting louder than the rain. The room smelled faintly of boiled pasta from the meager dinner she'd managed to prepare, though she had barely touched her own plate. Jake was on the floor in the corner, sitting cross-legged with his toy cars. He made soft engine noises under his breath, completely absorbed in the little world he had built on the threadbare rug. Emily glanced at him and forced a small smile, though her heart ached. He didn't need to know, not yet, how serious things had just become. Losing her job meant losing the last steady source of income they had. The small amount in her savings account wouldn't last long. She ran her hands over her face, trying to push back the tears threatening to fall. She couldn't cry now, not in front of Jake. She told herself she would figure something out tomorrow. She always had, somehow. But tonight, the uncertainty felt heavier than ever. A sharp knock at the door broke through the quiet. Emily froze. It was late, too late for a neighbor's casual visit, and she wasn't expecting anyone. Her first thought was that it might be the landlord, and her pulse quickened. She stood slowly, smoothing her wrinkled shirt with clammy hands, and crossed to the door. When she opened it, she was met with a sight so unexpected that she had to blink to make sure it was real. Standing there was a man she recognized instantly, though she had only glimpsed him briefly earlier that day at the hotel. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in an immaculate dark suit that seemed untouched by the rain. His hair was neatly combed back, and his expression was calm but serious. "You're Emily Carter?" he asked, his voice deep, measured. "Yes," she replied cautiously, gripping the edge of the door. "I'm Victor Harrington." He paused, watching her reaction. She knew the name, of course, everyone in the city did. He was the billionaire real estate magnate whose face appeared in business magazines and news reports. She had no idea why someone like him would be standing outside her run-down apartment. "You saved my daughter today," he continued, and the weight of his words made her straighten unconsciously. "Her name is Lily. I'm not sure what would have happened if you hadn't been there." Emily swallowed, unsure how to respond. I saw she was in trouble. I couldn't just stand there." His gaze softened slightly. Most people didn't notice until it was almost too late. You did. And you acted. Behind her, Jake peeked from the corner, curious about the stranger. Victor's eyes flicked toward him, then back to her. I'd like to talk, he said simply. Do you mind if I come in? Emily hesitated. She wasn't used to visitors, much less men in tailored suits with reputations that reached across the city. But something in his tone, calm, respectful, made her step aside. Please, come in. Victor stepped inside, taking in the small, tidy space with a quiet glance. Emily shut the door against the sound of the rain, her mind still racing with questions. The next morning, the rain had given way to a pale, hazy sunlight. Emily found herself standing in front of tall wrought iron gates that loomed over her like the entrance to another world. Beyond them, a long driveway curved through manicured gardens toward a sprawling stone mansion. She still couldn't quite believe she was here. The events of the previous night played over in her mind. Victor's unexpected visit, his quiet but firm request that she come by so he could properly thank her. When the gates opened with a smooth, mechanical hum, she took a steadying breath and walked forward. The driveway crunched softly under her worn shoes, and she was suddenly aware of how out of place she must look against such grandeur. Her coat was neatly pressed, but it was still the same old one she had worn for years. The front doors swung open before she reached them, revealing a uniformed woman with a warm but formal smile. Mr. Harrington is expecting you, she said, ushering Emily inside. The foyer was so large it could have fit her entire apartment twice over. Light spilled from an enormous chandelier, scattering across polished marble floors. Before she could take it all in, a small voice called out from somewhere down the hall. Emily. A blur of white and pink came running toward her, Lily, the little girl she had pulled from the balcony. She flung her arms around Emily's waist with such force that Emily almost lost her balance. Emily knelt down, hugging the child back, feeling the warmth of her small frame and the way she clung as though afraid to let go. Hi there, sweetheart, she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. The girl's eyes were brighter than they had been the day before, though traces of shyness still lingered. Victor appeared in the doorway of a sunlit room, his presence filling the space without effort. I see she hasn't stopped talking about you since yesterday, he said with a faint smile. Come in. He led her into what could only be described as a conservatory, walls of glass revealing sprawling gardens, sunlight pooling on pale stone tiles. A tray of tea and fresh pastries sat on a low table between two armchairs. The air smelled faintly of roses from the garden outside. Emily sat, feeling awkward but trying not to show it. Victor poured her tea himself, a small gesture that surprised her. Lily's had a difficult year, he began, his voice low and measured. Since her mother passed away, she's withdrawn. She hardly speaks to strangers, and she avoids crowds. Yesterday, when you held her, she didn't cry from fear. She held on to you. Emily's fingers tightened slightly around her cup. She just needed someone to grab her. I'm sure anyone would have done the same. I'm not sure they would have, Victor said, meeting her eyes. Which is why I'd like to make you an offer. I want you to work here, not as a maid or a server, but as Lily's caretaker. Live in the house. Be with her. Help her feel safe again. The words seemed unreal. Emily's mind raced, torn between disbelief and the quiet flicker of hope blooming in her chest. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say yes, Lily piped up, her small voice breaking through the tension. She had climbed into Emily's lap without permission, her head resting comfortably against Emily's shoulder. Victor smiled faintly at the sight, then added, name your salary. Whatever you need to care for your own child as well, we can arrange it. Emily looked down at Lily, then back at Victor. The offer felt like a doorway to a life she had never dared imagine, but one part of her still hesitated, unsure if she was dreaming. Emily sat in the conservatory long after Victor's words had faded into the quiet hum of the morning. The sunlight filtered through the glass walls, painting the room in soft gold, and somewhere beyond the gardens, a fountain splashed gently. Lily remained curled in her lap, her small fingers clutching the fabric of Emily's sleeve as though afraid she might vanish if she let go. The offer hung in the air like something fragile, almost too delicate to touch. A part of Emily wanted to accept immediately, how could she not? The thought of a steady job, a safe home, and security for Jake was almost too much to hope for. But another part of her, the part that had been worn thin by years of disappointments and false promises, urged caution. Life had taught her that nothing came without a cost. She glanced at Victor, who sat across from her with the calm confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Yet there was no arrogance in his expression now, only patience, as though he understood she needed a moment. You wouldn't have to decide today, he said gently. But Lily has already decided for both of us, I think. Emily managed a small smile. It's not just me I'd be moving in, she said quietly. My son, Jake, he's 8. We've never been apart. I couldn't take a job that didn't include him. Victor nodded without hesitation. Of course. This is not a problem. I would expect you to have him here. We can arrange for his schooling, his needs, everything. The ease with which he said it unsettled her. She was used to landlords counting the number of occupants in a unit with suspicion, employers making it clear that single mothers were too much trouble. No one had ever made room for both of them without question. Lily shifted slightly, lifting her head to look up at Emily. You can stay in my house, she said in a matter-of-fact tone, as if the decision were hers to grant. And Jake can play with me in the garden. Emily laughed softly, the sound catching in her throat. She could see it already, Jake running across that green expanse, his laughter mixing with Lily's, both children safe and carefree. The image was so vivid that it almost hurt to imagine. Her fingers smoothed down Lily's hair, and she took a slow breath. All right, she said finally, her voice steady but quiet. I'll do it. Lily's arms tightened around her, and Emily felt the little girl's relief like a pulse. Victor's expression didn't change much, but there was a faint warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Good, he said simply. I'll have the staff prepare the West Wing for you and your son. We can arrange the rest later. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Victor showed her through the mansion, the long hallways lined with art, the sunlit bedrooms that looked out over the gardens, and the quiet library where Lily liked to sit. It was a world so far removed from the cramped apartment she and Jake had called home that it felt almost unreal. When she finally stepped outside again, the sunlight was brighter, the air lighter. For the first time in a long while, the weight on her shoulders had eased, replaced by a cautious hope. She had lost her job the day before, but now she was stepping into something she couldn't have planned for, a new beginning. As she walked back toward the gates, she glanced over her shoulder and saw Lily waving from an upstairs window. Emily waved back, knowing deep down that everything had already changed. And this time, maybe it was for the better.